This one is a request from the Pro Wrestle Machine Discord. Roddy Piper is one of the greats. Here's his book, In the Pit with Piper, by Roddy Piper, with Robert Picciarello. Chapter 1. Roddy Piper is born. Most normal people come into the world on a specific day of a specific month during a specific year. Not me. While I was born Roderick George Toombs on April 17, 1954, in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, I didn't truly come to life until 15 years later when I found my true calling, pro wrestling, which would eventually give me my real identity of Roddy Piper. I took up the rough and tough sport in 1969, but before that I was an outcast in society who was going nowhere fast. The only thing I was good at was playing the bagpipes. To tell you the truth, I don't know why I started playing the instrument. Though my father was Scottish and my mother was from Ireland, I didn't learn from them how to play the bagpipes. I was really young, about 5 or 6, and living on an Indian reservation called the Pie in Manitoba when I started playing the pipes, and I don't even recall who introduced me to them. I don't think it was one of my neighbors because I was the only white kid living on the reservation, and I can't imagine myself playing the bagpipes and dancing around a fire with 14 Apaches. Why didn't I pick the guitar and become the next Eric Clapton, or choose the drums and become a great drummer like Ringo Starr? No. God gave me the bagpipes, so that made me an underdog from the beginning, because you know what comes with the bagpipes, a kilt tilde, not a dress, but a kilt. But while there is nobody alive who can help me solve the mystery of when and how I started playing, no one can dispute that I'm good on the pipes. At 13, I left home and decided to give it a go on my own. I hitchhiked from place to place and I played my bagpipes, leaving my case open, hoping to make a quarter, which would allow me to get into a youth hostel. But I was never in one place for a very long time. I was constantly on the move, and wherever I went, my bagpipes followed. One year the two of us teamed up with a band called Caberfay and took part in a competition in Toronto at the C&E Gardens. We were up against the best pipe bands from around the globe, and believe it or not, we came in 5th in the world. Pretty impressive for someone who isn't sure why he started playing the instrument in the first place, don't you think? But the rest of my early memories aren't as special. As a matter of fact, they're kind of shitty. To put it plainly, I was a delinquent who had a knack for finding trouble, and even when I wasn't trying, trouble found me. Now, even though I don't agree with most of Canada's rules, I do have a lot of respect for the country, especially since the powers that be kept me out of reform school. You see, Canada had a couple of experimental programs that tried to put juvenile delinquents on the straight and narrow, and I became the country's white mouse for quite a few of them. One of the first years I was in school, I was enrolled in a program in which the teachers were teaching us math and spelling through some new methods. Well, unfortunately for me, none of them worked. To this day I still can't spell a word, and the only time I can add is when a promoter is paying me. So, you see, I didn't have a very good crack at school from the beginning. I would have loved to stay in and get an education and become a psychologist. That's what I really wanted to be. But years later the only Yale degree I would get would be ADD. Another program I got involved in was one in which the Canadian government actually put me in boot camp with the Canadian Armed Forces. I had to put in 6 weeks of basic training and then show up once a month for a year until I was finished with the program, which would give me an honorable discharge. I never imagined myself wearing a uniform and serving my country, but this training turned out to be a good thing for me. It kept me off the streets and out of trouble for a while, and instilled a powerful belief in discipline in me that has stayed with me until this very day. The Army also taught me to be an expert marksman. I became good with a machine gun and even better with a knife, all things a juvenile delinquent should learn. It was organized fighting and I liked it. After I received my honorable discharge, I was once again back to my nomadic life, living in hostels or on the streets. Like I said, in my travels as a teen, I tried as best as I could to stay in school and get an education. Also in my travels, I got involved in school athletics. I started playing sports like football, basketball, and hockey, but even though I was a natural athlete, I could never have made a dime off any one of those sports. But one sport I tried and liked was wrestling. I picked up on it quickly, maybe because my father and uncle were both amateur boxers and it was in the blood. As a matter of fact, when I was living at home, they used to take me down to the basement and try to teach me about boxing and also how to protect myself. Wrestling also came naturally to me because I'd been fighting all my life. One of the youth hostels that I got into had a police athletic league and an amateur wrestling coach. From the very first time I locked up with someone, I excelled on the mat. At the age of 15, I won the 167-pound amateur wrestling championship of Manitoba. This was quite an accomplishment and confidence booster for me because, believe it or not, I was a shy, reserved kid who didn't look for any attention. When I entered this tournament, I had no idea what to expect, especially after I got my ass kicked in my very first match against an opponent who was not only 2 weight classes above me, but who also had a build that resembled Chris Benoit's. But surprisingly enough, I won all my remaining matches, and as luck would have it, I met up with a Benoit-like wrestler again in the finals. Not expecting to win the match, I wrestled defensively against my opponent in the first round because I felt I lacked the size, experience, and mostly the confidence that was needed to pull off a victory. But something happened in the second round that not only turned the finals around, but also my wrestling career. I hip-tossed my ripped foe and heard him grunt and groan as he landed. This gave me the boost I needed, as I now realized that I had a chance. In the third round, I had confidence to go on the attack and even got the grappler in a half Nelson. But just as the ref was counting the guy out, the bell rang, ending the round and match. I was pissed because I thought I had the pin when the bell rang, and I also thought I had lost the match. But to my surprise, the ref came over and raised my arm in victory, and this gave me all the confidence in the world to go after what I wanted for the rest of my life. One of my friends was enrolled in a professional wrestling school run by a guy named Tony Candello, who was a barber by trade. My friend said, "Why don't you come on by and see what's going on?" So I went and was introduced to Candello. My friend told his teacher that I was an amateur wrestling champion, and dollar signs must have flashed before this guy's eyes. You see, Candello not only ran this pro wrestling school, he was also a renegade, outlaw promoter who was looking to make a buck. He started making me all kinds of promises, and told me to sign a contract and he would turn me into a professional wrestler. At first I went along with this guy, but after talking to him some more, I realized he was just trying to get money out of me, which was like trying to get blood out of a stone because I certainly didn't have any money. By this time I had been on the streets for 2 years and I wasn't about to be anybody's fool. When he left the room, I stole the signed contract out of his briefcase, but still got booked on a wrestling card because they thought I went to the school. The first professional event that I took part in was way up in the tundra for a local promoter named Al Tomko in Churchill, Manitoba. Tomko packed into his van his lineup for the evening, which included me and 5 other scary-looking wrestlers, who could all rival the local Sasquatch in looks and size, and 2 lady midget wrestlers, who had nice long hair on their legs, which I guess kept them warm during the harsh winters. We took the van to the airport where a twin-engine pontoon airplane was waiting for us and was going to drop us off at the pond nearest our destination in Churchill. As the plane was going up, one of the midgets nudged me and pointed out that there was oil coming out of the left engine. Not wanting to alarm anyone and also being the new kid on the block, I gracefully went up to the pilot and informed him that the left engine was leaking oil. Without missing a beat, the calm, cool, and collected plane flyer answered me, "Yeah, I know. She leaks a bit. I've been meaning to get that fixed." Needless to say, we made it to our destination, which was a lumber camp that was filled with the loneliest, nastiest-looking bunch of lumberjacks that I had ever seen in my life. These guys, who Tomko informed me loved the sight of blood, made our group look like a bunch of raving beauties. The setup was even worse looking than the lumberjacks. There was no wrestling ring, just some mats on the cold, hard floor, and no chairs, just some broken-down wooden stools in the kitchen area where the lumberjacks ate. But we still managed to put on a good card for the jacks, who left the place smiling from ear to ear as they got to see some good matches and some bloodshed. Unfortunately for me, the blood being lost was mine. But I didn't care. As long as Tomko gave me my $15 for the night, I was happy. We made our way back to the plane, and there was our pilot with a big can of oil, filling up that engine again so he could fly us back. When we landed, we all piled back into the van and made our way to find a place to sleep for the night. I was so sore and achy that I couldn't wait to take a shower and crawl into bed. After driving for some time, Tomko pulled up and stopped in a state park and said, "All right, here we are." Now I was wondering what was going on. Did someone have to go to the bathroom? Nope. Turns out the park was going to be our home for the night. The ladies had the luxury of sleeping in the van, while us guys had to find a comfortable spot outside among the stars and nature. Al, being the caring promoter that he was, took it upon himself to build us a campfire to keep us warm while we searched for our beds for the evening. I chose the most comfortable picnic table that I could find and tried to catch some sleep after my first long night as a pro wrestler in the big leagues. I thought the adventure was going to be put to rest right there on the picnic table, but it was only beginning. I got up in the middle of the night to use the porta potty, and just as I was sitting down to do my business, I heard lots of commotion and what sounded like a roar coming from outside the stall. I pulled open the door a little, only to see a huge creature running around our camp. At first I thought nothing of it, thinking it was just one of our wrestlers taking a piss and having some laughs. but the joke would be on me. A few moments later I found my world turned upside down when the porta potty was sent flying, launching shit and me into the air. When I got up off the ground, I heard everybody yelling at me to get into the van because there was a wild bear running loose in our camp. With my pants down to my ankles, I ran as fast as I could to catch up with the group and jumped, bare-ass, into the moving van, narrowly escaping the claws of the wild beast. But just when I thought I was safe, Tomko and the group tossed me back out of the van because I stank, not to mention the shit that was now all over the seats in Al's van. Yes, I was already enjoying life as a pro wrestler. My time spent in the gym was memorable, because not only did I have the pleasure of working out with some of the biggest and best wrestlers on the circuit, I also had quite a few laughs. For instance, one time Al wanted me to repaint some of the equipment that had become worn and old looking from all the use and abuse over the years. So I took some paint and proceeded to give the dumbbells and plates a fresh coat of royal blue, using some white to paint the numbers. But as a joke, I repainted them all the wrong weights. I painted 25 pounds on the 40-pound dumbbells and 80 pounds on the 95-pound dumbbells. You can imagine how much I laughed watching 500-pound bench pressers like superstar Billy Graham and Hercules Cortez trying to figure out what's wrong with me today. The confusion on their faces alone was priceless, although short-lived. You see, these forefathers of mine weren't dumb. They made Tomko weigh the dumbbells. After they figured out what had happened, they found their own brand of humor, dragging me across the speed bumps of the mat again and again and again, and practicing their best moves on me. Quite honestly, they beat the shit out of me. The incident not only gave me another lesson in humility, it also left me out on the street again. But with all the wrestling I was doing, I was able to rent a room of my own for $25 a month from a lady in Winnipeg named Melanie. She was always singing that song, "I've got a brand new pair of roller skates. You've got a brand new key." However, she was over 300 pounds and I didn't ever want to know if the key fit. Anyway, Melanie rented me her front porch. I had a hot plate, a bed, and 2 candles on the wall. Now, Winnipeg is a city where the temperature sometimes drops to 60 below, and I was sleeping on a porch, but it was better than being on the streets. I enrolled in a school that wasn't too far away from my place. Even though I was never really good with books, I wanted to get an education. I tried to stay in school, but it was hard. I was an outcast because with all the moving around I did, I was always the new kid in class. That first day was undoubtedly the toughest. I was always nervous when I had to walk into a room filled with strangers and introduce myself. It became twice as hard when I started wrestling. So now I walk into the new classroom, and because I'm wrestling every night, I'm pretty marked up. Half of my face is raw and I walk in and everybody turns to stare at me, and they're wondering, who is this guy? And I don't want them to ask any questions. I don't want them to know what I'm doing. I mean, if they ask me what school I came from, what am I going to do? Give them a list. And if they ask me where I live, what do I say? On a porch, like a dog? So I just kept to myself, and everyone started thinking I was some tough guy, coming to school with scars and bruises all over my body. No one knew me well enough to know what I did outside of school. Hell, I don't even think they knew my name. And even if they did know my name and had the nerve to ask me questions, I didn't give them direct answers because I didn't want anyone to know my business. I was always hiding behind some kind of mask. But the truth of the matter is that Roddy Piper was always a scared-to-death coward who was extremely introverted and insecure. I had nothing in common with any of these kids and I didn't know what to say to them. There were many times back then when I was scared to death, and there were many times after that when I was scared shitless too, but I learned over time that it was okay to be afraid. What's not okay is having those emotions stop you from doing what you want to do. My education came to a screeching halt on the day I was supposed to take part in my first pro match in a big-time league, the American Wrestling Association. I was all excited during the day because not only was I going to take part in an AWA event, I was also going to be making $25 for the bout, a $10 bump up from my other matches. But I almost didn't make the match in the Winnipeg arena that night because I had gotten into trouble during the day with 4 or 5 other students and we all had to stay after school. I don't remember what we did to get punished, but I do remember why I walked out on school for good on that day. As I sat at my desk thinking about the night's match, my teacher ordered me up to the front of the classroom to help the other detained students clean the blackboard. When I approached her desk, she handed me a brush and sarcastically asked me if I had somewhere better to be. I answered her by saying, "Yeah, I do. I can see me telling the crusher tonight why I was late for the match, that I was a bad boy in school and had to stay after and clean the blackboards." Well, I made it through the afternoon and raced to get ready for the match. This was big time for me, and I had told all my friends about it. My pipe band buddies had decided they would help me make a grand entrance. I was going to wear my plaid trunks and these ridiculous high-topped green boots, and my full pipe band, all wearing kilts, would be wailing away as I stepped into the ring. On my way to the arena, I snuck into the Marlborough Hotel, a familiar stomping ground for me. I was always slipping into that hotel at night, hunting down room service trays that guests had chucked out in the hall. They left a lot of good food on those trays. But on this night, I wasn't looking for a meal. I stole a wicker basket, which I was also going to use on my way into the ring that night. I wanted to fill it with roses, but I couldn't afford them, so I settled for dandelions that I picked out of the grass. After all the rushing around, I managed to get to the arena an hour before the match, and I found out that I was facing Larry Hennig. Hennig was 35 years old and weighed about 320 pounds. He looked like a Viking. He had no neck, and there was hair growing out of his ears, nose, and teeth. He had just lost the World Heavyweight Championship, and this was his next fight, and boy was he mad. He growled to the promoter, "Go tell that kid, just be like a Greyhound bus and leave the driving to us." I had no idea what was going on. Being the lanky and inexperienced wrestler that I wasn't going to argue with a guy who was twice my age, not to mention twice my size. Besides, this was big stuff. Not only was the money good, EAWA was the big time, where so many wrestling greats had passed through the promotion. Grapplers like superstar Billy Graham, Dusty Rhodes, Billy Robinson, Nick Bockwinkel, Vern Gagne, Ric Flair, Sergeant Slaughter, and Hulk Hogan, just to name a few, at one time or another, graced these mats. I went there with the full intention of giving it my best shot, hoping that somehow I would get noticed. My entrance alone that night got me noticed. I came into the arena led by a full wailing pipe band, 4 pipers, 2 snares, and a bass drummer wearing a big, fuzzy hat with a pint of scotch stuck in the hole of it, as tradition always dictated. Me, I was 167 pounds soaking wet, in the middle of these guys, with my basket of dandelions, which I was sharing with the crowd, to their complete disbelief. As I approached the ring apron, the announcer, who didn't know me from Adam, all he knew was that my name was Roddy, said, "Ladies and gentlemen, coming to the ring at 167 pounds, Roddy, Piper." Thus the birth of Roddy Piper. They were shocked. They had never seen anything like it. This was all new to the audience and to Hennig and to me. There were no grand entrances in those days. There was no music blaring from the arena speakers or pyrotechnics all around. Wrestlers just used to walk into the ring ready to fight. They'll never forget the look on Hennig's face when I finally stepped through the ropes. If looks could kill, I would have been dead twice over before the bell even rang. As I got into the ring, all I saw was a large human mass with lightning coming out of his eyes and thunder coming out of his ass. The bell rang, and the next thing I knew, Hennig had snatched me as fast as a rattlesnake and hit me so hard I fell backward. I was falling through the ropes and would have hit my head on the concrete if it hadn't been for the kind-hearted Hennig. He reached through the ropes and grabbed me by the hair, ripping some of it out as he saved my life, only to pull me back in the ring and give me his finishing hold, called the axe, and then cover me. Figure that it takes a 3 count in order to beat a guy, and add another 7 seconds to that, and you have my first world record in professional wrestling. I have the honor of being beaten in the shortest amount of time in Winnipeg Arena history, 10 seconds. I left the ring and went back to the locker room feeling dejected. My pipe band was gone. They had left the arena not too proud of my performance. I wasn't too thrilled about what happened that night either. My nose was broken and I was ashamed of myself because I thought I was a tough guy. As I sat there sulking with my head between my legs, Tomko came up to me, and all I remember seeing were his penny loafers. I didn't look up because I thought he was going to bawl me out or at least duke me out of my 2 bits. But instead he said, "Kid, you did great. How'd you like to go to Kansas City?" I said, "Is Larry Hennig going to be there?" And he said, No, don't worry. We won't overmatch you again." So he slipped me across the border to wrestle. Tomko had been frequently going across the border to matches in the United States, and he put me in the back seat of his Lincoln Continental and threw a couple of blankets over me. When we got to the border patrol, he played me off as his son, saying, "Yeah, I got my son with me. He's always sleeping, lazy kid," and remarkably they let us through without a problem. Our first stop across the border was a very old-fashioned hotel called the Calhoun Beach Hotel, where my elders often provided studio wrestling for people as entertainment. I grappled with superstar Billy Graham and his huge 24-inch arms, and against many other wrestlers, all of whom outweighed me by at least 100 pounds. If you go back and look at some of the tapes of these old wrestling broadcasts, you'll see I was the guy that was always being squished. They just beat the shit out of me every chance they had, and seemed to enjoy it more and more each time. One night in the locker room after a match, Superstar joked and said to me, "Sorry, we were a little short on TV time." "Next time I'll give you more time, kid," I said in reply. "Yeah, right." I knew that Superstar didn't care how quick I lost the match or how much air time I had. Graham caught on that I wasn't buying his bullshit and started laughing. It was my first ribbing on the square, which you'll learn more about in Chapter 3, Experience, and the first time I called anybody on anything. But at this time in my life, I realized that I wasn't the brave young lad that I'd thought I was. I was a coward. I feared everything, therefore I feared nothing, and that's why I showed up. Besides being a punch dummy in the ring, I was also known as a resourceful fellow who could get anything the guys needed, from the lady at the bar to a room at a sold-out motel. Basically, I was a promoter's dream. Outside of our group, no one knew I existed, or cared. If I died, they'd move on to the next guy, and if I got busted, they'd deny knowing me. The only good thing for me was the experience of dealing with different kinds of people, from saints to serial killers, and I started not to scare too easily. But what other choice did I have? I was a teenager who had no education, no close friends or family members to help me out, and no driver's license to help me get around. I relied on all these guys to help mold me into someone who was going to be successful. Whatever they wanted or needed me to do, I was going to do it, no questions asked. If they needed me to go over the border with them for a match and would say, "Be there at 3, I made sure I was there by 5 to 3. In my early years in the sport, I was shuffled around from one guy to another, and I had to give them 1 cent per mile for gas in order to pay for a ride. At this time gas was really expensive. There was a gas shortage in effect and you could only buy it according to Neapolis, which is 500 miles. We certainly couldn't make that trip just on one full tank. So when we ran out of gas, we'd fill up using a 6-foot credit card. What's that, you ask? It's a garden hose. I would sneak out at night and siphon gas from whatever vehicle I could find. The farms were usually the best places to hit. All the farmers had these huge gas cans that they used for their tractors, and I would fill those up and then put the gas in our car. The only drawback was that farmers also usually had German shepherds, and unfortunately I don't speak German. You try running with 2 full 5-gallon gas cans with dogs biting at your heels. Those mutts would chase after me, and I'd knock the shit out of them with that garden hose. I knew that if I didn't get back to the car with gas, I'd be the one getting the beating. Here's another example of how I was treated, or mistreated, at the time. During the wintertime when we were driving from gig to gig, the guys would put the heat on high enough so that the warmth would reach only their feet. I'd be alone in the backseat freezing my balls off. One time, it had to be about 30 below outside and I was curled up in the back with my bologna sandwich and my bottle of 7-Up, trying to stay warm, and the guys were busting my chops, saying, "Ah, damn, it's so hot up here." About halfway through the drive, my bottle of pop exploded all over me, leaving me colder than I was before and without a drink for my lunch. Ah, life of a professional wrestler. Being the new kid on the block, I had to pay my dues like everyone else had done before me, but I also found the family and support I had never had as a kid. I didn't realize it at the time, especially when certain guys were ribbing me, but I'll never forget what guys like Bulldog Bob Brown, Ken Ramey, Lord Alfred Hayes the Viking, Ronnie Etchinson, and Maurice Mad Dog Vachon did for me. These guys all took me in like one of their own and made me who I am today. At one time or another, Ramey, Hayes the Viking, or Etchinson would get on me because I was so young and played the bagpipes and I wore a kilt. They would tease me and pretend to come on to me. Once I walked into an empty dressing room. All of a sudden the bathroom stall door flies open and there's Ramey sitting on the can playing with his pipe. I looked around and I realized there was nobody there but him and me. Now, to play a joke, there has to be an audience to get a laugh out of it. There has to be at least 3 to tango, doesn't there? But there was no third party laughing in a corner. It was just me and him. I really thought he was coming on to me. A few days later, Lord Alfred Hayes, who is hung like a horse, comes up to me as I'm getting out of the shower. He's naked and starts running after me, swinging his dick and yelling, "Roddy, Roddy." He's twirling that thing around like Roy Rogers trying to lasso Dale Evans. Another night, I'm standing in the dressing room in Kansas City and Bob Geigel, a great amateur and professional wrestler and promoter, calls me over. "Hey, kid, I want to talk to you." I was very interested to hear what he had to say about wrestling. I was always looking to get advice from guys who'd been around for a while and were top-notch wrestlers. I was so engrossed in what Mr. Geigel was saying that I tuned out everyone and everything around me. I was so distracted by Geigel, I was leaning against a bench with my hand behind me and somebody put something in it without me even realizing it. Finally Mr. Geigel finishes talking, and I notice that something is in my hand, so I squeeze it a few times, and turn around to see that it's Lord Alfred Hayes's donkey-sized penis. My mentors were now rolling around on the floor laughing at me, as this whole thing had been a setup. I felt humiliated, hurt, embarrassed, and angered all at once. You've got to understand, I have been living on the streets for 2 years. When you're on the street, you're constantly fighting not to get raped. I thought I was away from all that. I thought I was in a room with a bunch of men I could trust, but now I didn't know what to think. And I couldn't do anything, because there was nobody in this group who I could beat up. So what the hell was I going to do? I got to the point where I wouldn't shower in the same room as them anymore. I would get to the arena, change into my kilt in the car, then wait outside until it was my turn to go on. Then, after I finished, I would go back outside the arena to wait for my ride. If we didn't hit a gym along our bookings route where I could shower, I would stay dirty because I was convinced that these guys were a bunch of queers. Looking back, I realized this is when I officially became accepted into the world of professional wrestling. You see, after a few months there was the stink factor again for the second time in my life. But unlike the first time, when I stunk up the van, these wrestlers didn't abandon me. My mentors realized how much damage they had done to me and they wanted to make things right. One night Geigel came up to me and told me not to take life so seriously, and that the boys are just jerking around. I said, that's my problem. He told me if they didn't mess with you, it would mean they didn't like you. I thought to myself, do they have to like me this much? In my very early years, these men, one at a time or sometimes in a group, had me in school 24 hours a day. They taught me everything, starting with the basics, the 3 W's: wrestling, women, and whiskey. They wanted to make sure that I had a proper education. They also used me to get dates for them. They lovingly called me bait. We'd go out and all these 35-year-old guys with scars all over their faces would use me to attract women they wanted to meet. They'd see a woman they liked, and would say, "Go get that one for me." And I'd bring her over to the table. Whenever we wrestled in Dallas, Fritz von Erich would have me take out a fire marshal's daughter so he could pack more people into the arena than the fire laws would allow. These were the types of things I had to do when I was a young professional wrestler. Ain't life great? One wrestler in particular who left a lasting impression on me during this time was a man named Ivan the Terrible. This guy was big and burly and he was always dressed in a nice suit and wore a hat like Frank Sinatra. Just looking at him was enough to set your teeth chattering, knees knocking, and bring a tear to a glass eye. I had to take a trip with him from Kansas City to Wichita. Ivan didn't talk to me for the first 150 miles of the trip. I mean, he didn't say 2 words. The only sounds that were heard in the car, a Cadillac, came out of the radio speakers. Ivan loved to listen to talk radio. After being on the road for about 3 hours, he finally turned to me and asked, "Are you hungry?" I told him I was, and he pulled over to an old-fashioned roadside diner. He parked the car and got out, telling me to go inside 5 minutes after him. What? I was crushed. I almost cried. Had I done something wrong? Maybe he really didn't like me and didn't even want to be seen with me. But I was going to do whatever he said, so 5 minutes later, I walked into the diner and found Ivan sitting at the counter. We spoke a different language called Carney, which originated in the carnivals where professional wrestling started back in the late 1700s in the US. So, as I walk into the restaurant, Ivan tells me in Carney to sit down. You know, when guys sit at a counter, it's common practice to leave an empty stool between you, so that's what I did. But then Ivan says in Carney to get away from him. Ah, man, I thought to myself. This guy must really hate me. Now I know why they called him Ivan the Terrible. So I moved 5 or 6 seats down. Ivan had already ordered the best meal in the house, a steak, salad, and everything that came with it, and the waiter came up to me and asked what I'd have. Well, I didn't have much money, and to be honest with you, I was a little shaken up. So I said quietly, "I'll just have a Coke, please." At this point Ivan turned to me and bellowed loud enough for the entire place to hear, "What's wrong, kid? Aren't you hungry?" He then told the waiter to give me the same thing he was having. Now remember, up until this point there had been dead silence between us. I thought this guy hated me. He wouldn't let me come into the restaurant with him. He wouldn't even let me sit near him, and now he was ordering dinner for me? He even started talking to me. So now I thought, maybe he did like me, and I became a little bit more relaxed by the time my food came. Then all of a sudden Ivan told me to order lemon pie. Okay, fine by me. So when the waiter came by, Ivan ordered a piece of pie and I said that I'd like one, too. But as soon as the words came out of my mouth, Ivan started going crazy. He started yelling at me, telling me he had fought in the war and didn't want some punk kid mocking him. I had no idea what was going on, but Ivan's face was turning all red, and then he grabbed his chest and white foam started coming out of his mouth. Holy shit. This guy was having a heart attack or something. With foam oozing out of his mouth, he told me and Carney to come over to him, and when I did, he told me to get him the fuck out of there. But instead of listening to him, I panicked and I started yelling for the waiter to call for an ambulance. Ivan now pulled me close and called me a stupid shit and ordered me to take him to the car. I wasn't about to argue with this guy, so I said, "Fine, I'll take you to the car." Now, you have to understand, this guy was about 285 pounds, and I was at least 100 pounds lighter. How the hell was I going to carry him to the car? But somehow I managed to do it. I dragged him along, and the next thing I knew, I was in front of the diner, trying to stuff him into the passenger side seat of the Cadillac. I was so worried that he was going to die on me that I couldn't do anything right. I finally got Ivan in the car, at least I thought I did, but when I tried to close the car door, I slammed it on his ankle. Now Ivan got even more pissed and he started screaming for me to get into the car and drive. So I jumped into the driver's seat and started driving, even though I didn't have a license and I had no idea where the hell I was going. As I drove, Ivan remained slumped over in his seat, holding onto his mangled ankle while cursing the shit out of me. And then suddenly, from out of nowhere, he stopped, rose up like the Undertaker and looked in the visor mirror, wiping the foam from his face and calmly pulled the remainder of an Alka-Seltzer tablet from his mouth. There was nothing wrong with him. This was just how he got a free meal. Then he went into the glove compartment and, as calm as can be, marked on his map where we had just been so he would know to avoid the place the next time he was in town. A little farther down the road, Ivan told me, "Hell, kid. What do you think you're doing? Pull over. You ain't got no license. That's illegal. What are you trying to do? Get us arrested?" That was when I really knew I had found my calling. An epiphany, I believe they call it. Ivan's antics aside, I suddenly knew that after all the years of being a misfit, I had finally found my home in wrestling. I'd never felt so sure about anything in my entire life. Little did I, or anyone else for that matter, know at the time that I was about to embark on a successful career during which I would make millions of dollars. Most folks only have one dad. I now had 100, all cool in their own way. These gentlemen taught me to defend myself. Obviously physically, but twice as hard and more important, mentally. They not only trained me in all matters of life, they are also responsible for the birth and direction of the beast within me. They taught me that the wrestler, like the mouse, is a survivor. He must be able to fend for himself and also be aware at all times of his natural enemy. In the wrestler's case, it's the pea. One sad day in St. Louis, the first witnessed just how much power the snake-like pea has. Stereotypically, a pea is about 5 feet 6 inches, a 210-pound organism with a pot belly, wearing the same suit he's worn for the last 20 years, who smokes cheap cigars, that he had probably mooched, and sports a rug that looks like poodle roadkill. The P stands for promoter, the sleazy men who used to run territorial wrestling promotions worldwide. On this day, the promoter walked up to one of my fathers and said, "You stupid fucking," and then continued to rip into him. I don't know if they knew I was there, but I just stepped back outside into the hallway waiting for him to pummel the P like he did his opponents in the ring. As far as I was concerned, he was a dead motherfucker. You have to understand, here was this pint-sized white guy yelling at a 320-pound black guy who could beat him to a pulp in an instant. But instead of pounding the P, my father did nothing. He just sat back and took it. To this day, I'll never forget watching in horror as one of my idols, a guy head and shoulders above other men, melted into the floor, taking all this crap from a promoter. I got very angry at my father, thinking, hit him. He just called you a fucking. I was almost in tears. My mind was racing. Why are you being such a coward? Then I became very sad. I realized that he took it because he just wanted to walk away with his day's pay. I didn't comprehend it at the time, but that was pretty damn honorable, man. Forget about dignity, his family had to eat. He did what he had to do to put a meal on the table, and I respect that. What I saw in St. Louis that day gave me a foundation that will stay with me forever. Part 1 of this foundation is a love for my brothers, who put their families above all else, including personal pride. And part 2 is lifelong hatred for promoters and the common housefly. This is the end of this chapter. Thank you for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe to keep up with the next program.